One afternoon, at an inter-school soccer match in Cuba, there was a boy who played very well. His name was Jorge. In that match, Jorge managed to beat the opponent and scored the winning goal. But right after he managed to score a goal, suddenly his breath hitched and Jorge fell unconscious. Everyone panicked and immediately took him to the hospital. In front of the emergency room, Jorge's parents waited anxiously until not long after, the doctor came. There, the doctor informed that Jorge's lung condition was getting worse. It turns out, since childhood Jorge suffered from acute respiratory disease. The doctor even told them that Jorge will probably not live to the age of 20. Hearing that, both Jorge's parents were shocked, but the years passed and it turned out that the doctor's words were wrong. At the age of 30, Jorge is still alive and able to carry out his activities as usual even though his lung disease has not healed. One day, on the plane, Jorge met a beautiful flight attendant named Leslie. Because every time the plane took off or landed, Jorge's shortness of breath recurred, so Jorge asked Leslie to help hold his hand until he calmed down. As a professional flight attendant, Leslie didn't mind. She then sat down and allowed Jorge to hold her hand. After the plane arrived at its destination, Jorge, who was interested in that beautiful woman, then asked for her number while saying that if his business here was finished, he wanted to invite Leslie to have lunch together as a thank you. Leslie, who was also interested in Jorge, gave him her number. When his work was done, as promised, Jorge invited Leslie to lunch at the restaurant. Unfortunately, they couldn't talk for long, because Leslie had to get on with her work. Even though they only met briefly, Jorge's love for her grew. Until one day, when the aircraft staff was going to stay at a hotel in the Hawaiian Islands, Leslie was surprised that Jorge was also there. As it turned out, Jorge secretly found out the location of this hotel from Leslie's coworkers to make a surprise. They then took a walk together on the beach. Jorge told her that almost all members of his extended family were in the beverage business, including him. Their conversation grew closer, and at that moment Leslie felt jealous and said that it must be very nice to be doing business with the family. Because in her family, Leslie is the only daughter, so she always feels lonely. She really wants to have a big family, so if she gets married later, she wants to have many children. They then proceed to the bar, where Jorge suddenly sings a special song for Leslie, a romantic song in which every lyric tells about how much he loves the beautiful woman in front of him. Hearing Jorge's singing, Leslie was touched. And since that moment, the two of them ended up dating. Then, after months of dating, Jorge and Leslie decided to get married. But after only 1 year of marriage, they have to face the harsh reality. Due to the side effects of lung drugs that were continuously consumed for decades, Jorge was declared infertile. In the midst of adversity, Leslie tried to encourage her husband by saying maybe they really can't have many children, but since getting married and being warmly welcomed by Jorge's big family, Leslie can feel what it's like to have a big family. His wife's words made Jorge feel much better. Years later, when their family was together, Jorge's mother asked Leslie how her son was doing. With a sad face, Leslie replied that now, Jorge's lung condition was getting worse. The doctor even sentenced Jorge's age to live a little longer. While Jorge still has to continue to struggle with his illness, on the other hand, there is a teenager named Chris who looks happy to be enjoying his teenage years. Like this time, when he was playing basketball, Chris pretended to pass out to prank his friends. Not long after, Chris' older brother, John, came to pick him up. Actually, Chris and his brother were not very close. Along the way, John kept on ignoring Chris, who tried to talk to him. When he got home, after greeting his parents, Chris saw there was a letter on the dining table. It was a notification letter from the university where Chris applied, and when he read the letter, Chris was disappointed that he had not passed. Chris felt sad and went into his room. Chris' mother tried to comfort him by suggesting that Chris attend a university outside the city, where his second brother, Colin, studied. Finally, according to his mother's advice, Chris tried to apply to the university. 1 month later, Chris started to study at that university. And it was his first day of college. When the class is finished, the classroom will be used by another department. At that time, Chris accidentally bumped into a beautiful woman named Sam. When he saw Sam at first glance, Chris immediately fell in love, and he kept staring at Sam until he didn't blink. In the afternoon, Chris confided to his brother, Colin, that earlier in class he met a very beautiful girl like an angel. Hearing his brother's story, Colin laughed and he said as a new student, Chris should have enjoyed his college days first. After all, on campus, there are lots of beautiful girls like angels, and they are also very sexy. So why does Chris focus on just one girl? Hearing that, Chris couldn't help but sigh. The next day, when he was about to go to class, Chris accidentally bumped into Sam again. There, Sam was distributing flyers and looking for volunteers who could drive a car to accompany her on her college assignment project. So, Sam's project aims to take people who need an emergency ride. For example, if a girl wants to go to a party but is afraid to go alone at night, she can order Sam's services to take her to the party. Hearing Sam's explanation, in order to get closer to this beautiful girl, Chris offered to volunteer, even though he couldn't drive a car. That night, when Chris and Sam were waiting for orders, Sam gave Chris her iPod. When Chris checked Sam's playlist, Chris saw that there were a lot of wedding song playlists. Sam is embarrassed that her secret is out, then hastily grabbed her iPod again and said that she was just trying to save the songs. Chris then said that Sam should not be ashamed, he knows all women must have their own dream wedding concept. In the middle of the chat, Chris got an order from 3 customers who asked to be picked up at different places at once. Happily, the 2 of them rushed off to pick up the customers. In the middle of the road, the 3 customers asked to stop first to eat at the restaurant. While waiting, Sam confided that in fact, the reason she made this project was because her mother had an accident. Her mother was hit by a car driver who ran a red light. And since that incident, Sam wants to help others not to suffer the same fate as her mother. At that time, Chris was amazed. The woman he loved was not only beautiful but also kind-hearted. Several months passed, Chris and Sam's relationship grew closer. They always did activities together, even Sam taught Chris to drive. One day, at home, when Chris was off from college, his father was angry because he was only in semester 1, but all of his grades were bad. Chris wanted to tell his father that he was in love, but because his father was angry, Chris could only apologize and promise that he would improve his grades in the next semester. A few weeks later, Sam took Chris to take a driving test to get a driver's license. When Sam reads Chris' registration form, she is confused as to why Chris wrote that he agreed that if one day he died, he would donate all his organs to people in need. And before entering the test room, Chris asked Sam if he passed the test, would Sam want to be his girlfriend? At that time, Sam was surprised and happy at the same time, and she replied that she was willing. Luckily, Chris passed the driving test. That night, to celebrate their dating, Chris took Sam on a picnic and enjoyed the beauty of the stars. In that romantic moment, they both tell each other about their respective family lives. Chris then plans to introduce Sam to his family tomorrow. Even though he's just dating, Chris wants to show off his beautiful girlfriend in front of his 2 single brothers. The next day, Chris' family picnic went smoothly. They all warmly welcomed Sam's presence. Arrogantly, besides showing off his beautiful girlfriend, Chris also showed off his new driver's license. In the afternoon, when he wanted to go home, Chris told his father that he loved him very much. But Chris' father looked ignorant and did not reply to his son's expression. Until one sunny morning, when Chris, Sam, Colin, and Chris' friends were gathered in the campus dormitory, suddenly Chris fainted.
Chris, dude, cut it out.
Yeah, Chris.
At first, they thought that Chris was just joking. But when checked, it turns out Chris really passed out. Frantically, they rushed Chris to the hospital. After being examined in the emergency room, Chris was then transferred to another room. There, Chris' family had gathered. Not long after, the doctor came. The doctor informed that Chris' brain suddenly suffered a severe hemorrhage. Cases of this disease are very rare and only affect 2% of people worldwide. If by tomorrow Chris is not conscious as well, then with a heavy heart, Chris is declared dead. The doctor's explanation made everyone in the room speechless and shocked. The next day, their fears were getting bigger because Chris was still unconscious. Seeing her boyfriend helpless, Sam cried and asked Chris to wake up repeatedly. In the midst of despair, suddenly heard Chris's voice calling Sam's name. Slowly, Chris started to open his eyes. Everyone was so relieved that Chris finally made it through his critical period. Chris, who was still weak, tried to sit down and propose to the girlfriend he loved so much in front of his entire family. And, 1 month later, Chris and Sam got married. Months had passed, Chris' life seemed so perfect, it was as if the terrible events before had never happened. Now, Sam is pregnant with their first child. As a future good father, Chris always accompanies Sam for pregnancy exercises every day. In contrast to Chris's happiness, on the other hand, Jorge's condition only worsened. While on vacation with his family on a cruise ship, Jorge fell unconscious again. Jorge and Leslie then went home. After being examined, the doctor explained that if Jorge still can't get a lung donor, maybe Jorge won't be able to survive until next month. Hearing that, Leslie tried to be tough. That night, Leslie kept praying to God to give her husband a miracle. Not long after, Jorge came. Then took out a small gift while singing a birthday song for his wife. Even though Leslie's birthday was next month, Jorge said he wanted to celebrate Leslie's birthday together earlier, because he was afraid he wouldn't be there until next month. Leslie couldn't hold back her tears. Until one night, Leslie got a call from the doctor. The doctor reported that he had succeeded in getting a lung donor for Jorge. Leslie felt a glimmer of hope. She then took her husband to the hospital. There, Jorge had to do a lot of tests first. Before entering the examination room, Jorge gave his wedding ring to Leslie. There, Leslie tried to strengthen her husband and said that everything would be fine, and after this, they both would be able to live life as before. Elsewhere, Chris was just coming home happy. Chris tells Sam that he's been accepted as a firefighter. Sam was also happy, because she knew that from the beginning, Chris had always wanted to be a firefighter. But in the midst of that happiness, suddenly Chris was silent for a long, long time. Until he finally came to his senses. Chris realized that all the happiness he had felt so far was not real. He never married the woman he loved so much. In fact, on the day Chris was diagnosed with a cerebral hemorrhage, he never woke up again. Chris' father, who saw his son critically, continued to cry. But no matter how much he called his son's name, no matter how hard he expressed his affection, Chris remained silent, and no answer would ever come out of that naughty boy's mouth again. The next day, the doctor came and called Chris' whole family. The doctor said that a few minutes ago, Chris' brain had died, which meant that Chris could no longer be saved. The doctor then said that according to the notes that Chris had written on his driver's license, the hospital would donate 5 organs of this young man's body to anyone in need. Doctors don't yet know who the lucky person who will be the recipient of the organ donor will be, but for sure, Chris has saved the lives of 5 people. That night, after the organ removal surgery, Chris's friends gathered outside the hospital holding candles to signify their condolences. In front of them, Chris' father thanked them for coming. Losing Chris was a heavy blow for him, but there was one thing that hurt more, that he was too late to return Chris's affection. The father advised everyone there to immediately call the most valuable person in their life, then express their love for that person before regretting. Because no matter how hard we beg to turn back time, even if it's only for 1 minute, time will never turn around. The next morning, at another hospital, when Jorge woke up, he was happy that he could breathe normally again. Jorge then asked Leslie, whose lungs were in his body. Then, his wife replied that it was the lungs given by a good person. On that day, there was happiness, but on the other hand, there was also sadness.
But they are at peace. Their hope is full of immortality.
Always.
A few days passed, and one night, Chris's family got a letter from Jorge. As it turned out, Jorge was one of 5 people who got an organ donor from Chris. In the letter, Jorge expresses his gratitude to Chris. If Chris's family allows, Jorge wants to know more about his savior angel. Reading Jorge's letter, Chris' parents were moved. And after many times exchanging letters, finally Chris's family and Jorge met. At that moment, Jorge once again expressed his gratitude and promised to take good care of the most beautiful gift that Chris had given him. Chris' body indeed came from the ground and was about to return to the ground, but before returning to the ground, this young man chose to give the others a second chance of life.